Today, we're diving into a topic that impacts so many people, but doesn't get talked about enough: hair loss. Have you noticed your hairbrush looking like it's wearing a wig lately? Or maybe every time you catch a glimpse of your hairline in the mirror, you're wondering, where did my hair go? Hair loss can feel like a mystery, but today we're getting to the root of it with an expert by my side. I've brought in Dr. Ruby Dang, a naturopathic doctor at Zen Regen, who specializes in hair health, medical weight loss, and hormone balancing. Welcome to the Zen Regen podcast here on YouTube. I'm your host, Megan Sharpe, and I'm so glad you're here. This show is your go-to space for the latest breakthroughs in health, wellness, and aesthetics. From red light therapy to longevity medicine, we cover it all with one goal: to help you feel, look, and live your absolute best. Make sure to hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And if you're ready to dive deeper and work with our team, head to zenregen.com. Now let's get into today's episode. Ruby's also a clinical study investigator at the Integrative Research Institute, where she leads innovative clinical trials with companies like Nutrafol, Arbonne, AbbVie, and Burt's Bees. She truly knows the science behind healthy hair, and today she's going to share her insights with us.
Thank you so much for that intro, Megan. That was amazing.
Well, we're super excited to have you on the show. And I know today we're going to be going over a lot of the main causes of hair loss and the impacts that diet, lifestyle, and possibly stress have on hair loss. Let's talk about also the warning signs, the best natural treatments, and bust any myths about hair loss along the way.
You got it. I mean, I love this topic so much because it's something that impacts almost every individual at some point in their lives. And like you mentioned, it's not something that we talk about that often too. And oftentimes patients go to their doctors and they get dismissed. They're like, oh, it's just a part of life or it's part of aging. But really, it just tells us there's something going on underlying that can be addressed. And there are a variety of different root causes that do contribute to hair loss too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was reading something through the American Academy of Dermatology, and it said that approximately 80 million people in the US experience hair loss. This is a very large number, and I can only imagine the effects that it has on people. So can you tell us a little bit about what the main causes are or that you see in your practice?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I'd say the most common cause of hair loss is androgenic alopecia. And so what that is, in just kind of layman's terms, it's more male and female patterned. They say the hair loss, baldness, etc. But it's where hair is thinning around the crown of the head, the part line, and the temple region. Oftentimes it can be due to hormones. And so often elevated androgens such as testosterone, DHT can play a role. But in women, there are a variety of different hormones that can play a role. So low estrogen, which is triggered in perimenopause and menopause, which is triggered in postpartum, that can all lead to significant hair thinning and shedding. And beyond hormones, the biggest other root cause of hair loss that I see is stress. And so that's something that's not emphasized enough, is how much stress plays in terms of our hair. Because our hair is more so, I'd say, a kind of a protective mechanism, meaning when we're nourished, when we're happy, when we're not stressed, our hair is kind of luscious and growing and healthy. But it's the first place that can also signal that something else is happening internally. I always ask individuals that when something is going on with their hair, what started occurring 3 months prior? And that can often give a little bit more insight in terms of what is going on in terms of the root cause of their hair loss.
That's fascinating. And that really just shows how you take a holistic approach to evaluate hair loss. Can you tell us a little bit about that approach and what that looks like in the clinic?
Absolutely. So as a naturopathic doctor, I really focus on getting to the root cause, like I mentioned. So most of my visits, my intakes are about an hour long. So I want to know everything from what a person is eating, how they're sleeping, what are their relationships like, do they like their job, what are they eating, are they having regular bowel movements too? Because it all gives us insight in terms of the health of the person. And so holistically, we look at a bird's eye view in terms of individuals and their health. That being said, what a person is eating plays a significant amount of role. Most individuals are not consuming enough protein, and hair is made up of keratin, which we need an adequate amount of protein to help with the foundations of our hair and healthy hair growth. So someplace that I commonly just recommend and ask is, okay, give me a full 24-hour breakdown of what you eat in a day, and we can then go ahead and build out macros to give each patient in terms of getting to their hair goal as well as their health goals too.
So one of the things that I personally like to do is try and have anywhere between like 20 to 30 grams of protein before I even have my morning coffee. What are your thoughts on that?
I love that. Starting the day with that minimum of 20 to 30 grams of protein is essential, not only for our hair health, but for our hormone health too. So a lot of times when individuals are just fasted in the morning or they're consuming their morning cup of coffee on an empty stomach, it puts the body into a state of fight or flight. And when the body's in this, parasympathetic, this is more of a sympathetic state. It's not in parasympathetic. So when it's in the parasympathetic state, we cannot focus on resting, digesting. We can't focus on assimilating, detoxification, can stress out and emphasize our hormones to pursue a different pathway. So oftentimes I use different testing mechanisms to look at cortisol, to look at, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. And what we see is when an individual is stressed, they're pushing more of these hormones that can trigger hair loss too. So that being said, starting the day with protein can help with just adequate protein balance. And one thing that I often tend to ask my patients too is if they're hungry first thing in the morning, because if they're not hungry within 1 to 2 hours of waking, that can actually tell us that there is some cortisol dysregulation happening.
Do you oftentimes recommend like an anti-inflammatory diet for your patients to really focus on those whole foods and then obviously minimize processed sugars, reduce the oxidative stress?
Absolutely. So a lot of individuals don't know where to begin with diet. So one of the first places that I talk about is let's just clean up your diet, because it's crazy how many processed foods still sneak their way in, even though it's labeled as gluten-free, even though if it's labeled as, organic and healthy, anything that comes, in a plastic packaged bag is still processed. And so a place that I love to start educating people on is just getting them back in touch with cooking their food again. And so the Whole30 diet is something that if someone just needs, a ground level place to begin, I start them on that journey, because then usually they get encouraged to cook, they get encouraged to be in touch with their food, they go to the farmer's market, they pick their produce. And so I just love connecting people back to food again.
Are there specific resources that you would recommend for people to start with? I know the Whole30, but in terms of like places to go, sometimes it's really hard to know what's reputable and what's not because there's so much information floating around out there.
Absolutely. So what I like to do in my visits is tailor diet to each patient. When they come to me, they can have a lot of different things going on internally, meaning they can have digestive issues, they can have IBS, they can have food sensitivities. So oftentimes I'm usually the one that's giving them more of a specific diet to follow for a certain period of time. But what I love to do is check for food sensitivities too, because every individual is unique. And so what might be healthy and not inflammatory for one person can be inflammatory for another person too. So by actually assessing to see what foods are safe for us, what foods are potentially inflammatory for us, that can help guide kind of the direction of where to go. In terms of just more resources, like you mentioned too, something that I'm also passionate about is trying to avoid seed oils. There's a really great app called Seed Oil Scout too. And so you can just pop in your location on the app and it'll tell you all of the restaurants nearby you that are seed oil free, or if they use seed oils, what ingredients and recipes and dishes that they have the seed oils into.
I will definitely be sure to include that in our show notes because that's awesome information. All right, Dr. Ruby, I want to circle back to those darn hormones that you were mentioning earlier. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists reports that anywhere between 40 to 50% of women experience hair loss postpartum due to hormonal fluctuations. I know this is an area that you specialize in and really love. So let's talk a minute about the role that hormones play in hair loss.
Absolutely. So everybody knows when women are pregnant, their hair is luscious, it's long, it's growing, it's beautiful. And it's actually because of all of that estrogen in the body. And so what happens when a woman delivers and goes into the postpartum period, there's a rapid decline in estrogen. So estrogen is protective for hair, so it keeps it in the growing phase, which is called anagen. And so when there's a rapid decline in estrogen, a mother, especially new moms too, they're not sleeping, they're breastfeeding, their estrogen goes way down too. So that can trigger the hair to go into an early telogen phase, which is the shedding phase. That compounded with the stress and the increase in the cortisol also triggers the hair to go into the early telogen phase. So that really can trigger a lot of that postpartum shed. And most new mamas notice that they get the postpartum hair thinning right along the temple region too. Some women regrow their hair after, 6 months to a year postpartum, and some their hair is never the same. And so what I love to focus on with my postpartum mamas is let's get your nutrients checked too. Let's make sure you're nourished with your iron levels, your B vitamin levels, vitamin D levels, because especially when they're breastfeeding, their nutrient needs are so much in more demand. So therefore we need to just really pay special attention to these women, because oftentimes same thing, they're dismissed as it's a normal part of the process when there are so many things that we can do to help to support their hair.
Perfect. And I know that PCOS, menopause, and just that testosterone estrogen balance also plays a huge role. And we'll get into that in a later episode. But typically what I hear from patients coming in is that they go to their traditional primary care doctor or family medicine doctor, and they don't want to order these labs for them. They don't want to check these levels. Is that something, what would you encourage people to do in that case?
Well, first, I always encourage patients to advocate for themselves. And second, if they want to get insurance coverage, what I do is I give them a list of labs to talk to their primary care doctor about running, and I'll actually give them the diagnosis codes, because I want everyone to have, access to healthcare to use their insurance. But if their provider is not willing to run the labs, I always say, we can do it from our end too. And so, I can put in all these lab orders for them. We can look at their thyroid health. We look at their antibodies, because especially, the thyroid levels really do change during pregnancy. Iron levels change drastically during pregnancy. Ferritin is a marker that's often missed when checking for iron. So ferritin is a measure of iron storage in the body. And so a lot of times women come back with their ferritin levels being more so in a normal range when the reference ranges are around, I'd say 12, 13, 15 to 200. And if they're at that 12 or 13 mark, it's considered normal. But for hair health, we need a ferritin of at least 50. So a lot of women are also, thinking that their iron levels are normal when we have some room for improvement too. So that being said, I say, come back, let's run some labs, let's kind of really truly get to the root of it. And between looking at hormones, between looking at stress, between looking at nutrient deficiencies, we often almost can find the root cause.
Perfect. I love that. I want to go back to stress for a moment, because most people live such a fast-paced life. And we know, as you mentioned, that stress increases cortisol. And when we live in that constant fight or flight response, prolonged stress really diverts energy away from non-essential functions, including hair growth. So can you give us some simple stress management techniques that you would recommend to your patients that you find that are very impactful for hair?
Before I jump into that, I want to talk about the different ways stress can impact the body, because a lot of times people don't realize all of the different things that contribute to stress. So an example is getting sick, getting the flu. That's stressful on the body. Chronic stress from work, working long hours, not having enough restorative time, that's stressful on the body. Something significant, a breakup, the loss of a loved one, a move, that's all very stressful on the body. Any type of infection, a surgery, that's all stress on the body. So it's not just that, stress that we think, from the day-to-day hustle and grind. It comes from so many different places. What I've noticed with many of my patients with hair loss too is they're not sleeping enough. They're those types of people who wake up really early. They love the hustle and the grind. They have a couple cups of coffee before they even have a bite in their mouth. They're purely living off of what I call adrenaline and cortisol. And so the first things that I start to focus on, just talk about, okay, let's start just even reducing the amount of caffeine that you're consuming. Let's get at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. I like to encourage people to get sleep trackers too. So there's things such as the Oura Ring, Apple Watch, just to make sure they're getting enough restorative and deep sleep. And then I also love just checking in to see where can we encourage some self-care time. So most people have even a really hard time scheduling 5 to 10 minutes for self-care, whether that's exercise, movement, sunlight, meditation. So I try to really have people schedule in a bare minimum of 10 minutes in their day for something that puts them away from their phone, put their phone on do not disturb, put in either a podcast, go for a walk, do a little breath work or meditation. And I just try to really encourage small little steps that help to build habits over time.
That is so true. I know one of the things that I struggled with and still do occasionally actually is my quality and quantity both of sleep. And it was before I had my hysterectomy. I feel like I was up all the time, all hours of the night. I tried all these different techniques and I simply just couldn't sleep. And I was getting approximately 3 to 4 hours of sleep every night. And I know that that definitely played such a huge role. So again, going back to that, the hormones and how it affects us, it can be a big factor in your sleep too. So that's all great information.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't even imagine how those nights were for you. 3 to 4 hours, that's challenging because, then that contributes to the brain fog, not being able to think clearly throughout the day, making little mistakes here and there. So I'm happy to hear that sleep is better these days for you.
Well, it always helps to have you to, get my advice from too. All right, perfect. Well, can you share some of the best natural or holistic treatments for hair loss? I know that there is a lot of information out there about rosemary oil or scalp massagers, nutrient-rich serums, things that people are trying over the counter. And I would love to hear your perspective on them.
So I'm going to break it down because hair loss is multifactorial. So it needs an internal approach as well as an external topical approach. Not one approach is going to, fully fix it unless we get to the root cause of it. So let's just start with internally. So we kind of start with the foundations of, making sure they're sleeping, making sure they're eating well, say they're getting adequate amount of protein. I recommend bare minimum half of their body weight in grams of protein a day. If they're active, definitely increasing that protein intake, taking internal collagen is a great way to start to support hair health. Fun fact, marine collagen actually has the 17 amino acids that are essential for keratin production. And so that's what I usually say, let's just start with adding in some marine collagen every day. And then I know there's a lot of different plant-based sources of collagen too. And we can get a lot of different amino acids in there, collagen stimulators in there as well. And then otherwise, things besides internal, I like to recommend a lot of different herbs and different botanicals that can help with supporting hair growth. So there's different probiotic strains, such as Lactobacillus reuteri. That's been helpful to improve the anagen phase, so the growing phase of the hair. There's different nutrients such as silica, horsetail, different B vitamins. If iron's a concern, we can definitely supplement with iron. So these are all things that we can do internally. Topically, so I like to do a variety of different things. So some women have noticed when they oil their hair, they tend to have a little bit more hair shadow. They don't notice the changes. And the thing with oiling is—
Or it's just simply hard to style.
Yes. And it just gets greasy. They don't want to sleep with it overnight. So I usually recommend to get a thinner oil such as jojoba or argan oil, and you can add in some rosemary essential oil to it as well to just kind of place it onto the scalp, use one of those scalp massagers, keep it in for 30 minutes before a shower. And so what these oils are doing is they're encouraging and nourishing the new hair follicles that are coming out and the new hair that's coming out of these follicles to just be healthier. It gives them the essential fatty acids to protect them too. And with the study with rosemary's essential oil, so it was compared to 2% minoxidil. And in the study, individuals were split up between rosemary essential oil and minoxidil 2% for 6 months, a twice a day application. At the end of the 6 months, there were pretty much similarities between the two groups. So it was shown to be as effective as a 2% minoxidil. But the thing is, this is rosemary essential oil that has to be applied twice a day. And so some people ask, what is the best mode of, adding in rosemary essential oil? So I have people make a It's called like a hydrosol. So you get distilled water, you add a couple drops of rosemary essential oil, and you just spray the scalp. And that way it doesn't keep it too greasy, and just it's a little bit of that hydration. And the rosemary, what it does is it enhances microcapillary perfusion. So what that means is it brings circulation to the scalp. It increases the vasculature to the follicles. That's why I think it is helpful, but also not alone. Focusing on nutrients internally will also help to encourage the new hair growth externally. I do love a good scalp massage too. Some people like to do it for 5 minutes a day. Some people like to do it just with their oils. I say a couple minutes once a day, like anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes once a day is great. Same thing because it's increasing the circulation.
So one thing I do is I keep my scalp massager in my shower. And as I'm doing a deep conditioner, I like to just massage it. I know that it helps increase the circulation and it feels amazing too. So Absolutely. I don't make time in my day to do it outside of that. Not to mention my hair is done. And so it gets a little bit harder for me to do it during the day. But if I just keep it in my shower and do it when I do my deep conditioner once a week, it's perfect for my routine.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great way too, because especially with like the warm water, it's increasing, the circulation already to the scalp too. And so a lot of times there's shampoos, you can add a couple drops of rosemary essential oil to it too. And then with your massager, just really get in there too.
I love all of that. I want to just talk for a minute about how this affects people's confidence. I read a study from the International Society of Hair Restoration Surgery that said more than 60% of people experiencing hair loss report that it has a negative impact on their self-esteem. I can't even imagine. And it's interesting to me because I have a lot of hair. And so this isn't something that I ever really struggled with, but I know that it affects a lot of people that I love. And so I wanted to share a story about my husband, actually. And this isn't a topic that he and I ever spoke about at all. And he got in bed one night and said that he had made an appointment to go get a consultation for a hair transplant. And it really caught me off guard. I didn't realize that it was something that actually even bothered him at all. And I think, and when I was asking him, like, what triggered this, people start to make comments or, you see pictures of yourself and you start noticing it. And I asked him if it really bothered him. And he said, yes. And I guess as a woman who doesn't struggle with this issue, I didn't realize that it could be affecting other people around me that I love. And I want to talk a little bit about the early warning signs that people can look for, because I know once hair loss gets to a certain point, all of these amazing things that we're talking about today are not going to reverse. It might prevent, but it's not going to reverse the signs of baldness. So can we just jump into what some of those early signs of hair loss are that people should be looking for?
So thank you for sharing that story about your husband, because hair loss is an extremely distressing experience. So I always say, for men at least, the 2 reasons they go to their doctor is for hair loss and ED.
So true.
It's very true. And when I speak with so many women on a day-to-day basis when it comes to their hair, and hair is an essential part of our identity. And when we see our hair everywhere or it's changing, we feel like we're losing parts of ourselves too. So I take it very seriously when someone, mentions that their hair is changing. But that being said, the earliest signs that I like to encourage people to look out for is if they start to notice their hairline receding back, either along here, thinning at the temples. They start to notice, especially in women, their part line becomes a little bit wider. And then for men especially, if they tend to get thinning at that top crown of the head. So with our hair cycle, once a hair starts to thin and starts to shed, it has about a 5 to 7 year window where we can bring it back again. So once it kind of goes into this exogen phase, there's a 5 to 7 year window where you can encourage it to keep it going into the anagen phase, where it doesn't permanently don't lose it. And so what I tell people is earliest detection and earliest intervention is the best thing that you can do, because you don't want to be 10 years down the line where you've completely lost the hair follicle. And at that point, hair transplants may or may not even work too. Starting early is best, encouraging, different things that can promote anagen quickly. So one of my favorite things, PRP, red light therapy, those things all stimulate the follicles to go back into the anagen phase, as well as, topical support to nutrients nutrients internally targeting hormones, whether it's the low estrogen or elevated androgens. We can target all of those, especially in men too. So there's supplements and nutrients that can help with reducing the androgens as well as medications. And so talking to each patient about, what is their goal, and do they want to go kind of more of a holistic natural route? Do they want to go down the medication route, giving them the pros and cons, and then generally letting them kind of be the executive decision makers of how they want to move forward.
Yeah, I agree. I know when I talk to patients about supplementation, a lot of times they're like, oh, I'm not there yet. I don't need it. And this goes for a lot of what we do at Zen Regen is just people are like, I'm not there yet. But what they don't realize is that this doesn't happen overnight. So I always like to encourage them and discuss the importance of early intervention and seeing a professional. And once signs do start to appear, really making sure that you're taking proactive steps rather than waiting until it gets to the point where it's a significant bother to you.
Absolutely. I mean, this is so widely said now. Every ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So starting earlier before you have to go down that road of a hair transplant, or, starting to encourage them to focus on foods, to focus on, stress levels, to focus on exercise before they go down the path of chronic illness and disease. It's not just, do X and you will then have beautiful hair. We have to do a variety of different things to encourage it. And in doing so, we want to also change their health for the better in the long run too.
Yeah. Again, we can do all of these things to really help with hair loss or prevent it, but how can someone really determine if their hair loss is due to genetics versus lifestyle or environmental factors?
So same thing, just asking individuals, is there family history? And when it comes to genetics, we have more of a genetic predisposition to having certain hormonal kind of changes and affinities. If a man is walking in, his father, his grandfather all had more of that male pattern baldness, aka androgenic alopecia, what that means is that he's just more susceptible to having higher amounts of that DHT hormone. And what we can do is earlier on, we can try to reduce that in ways to prevent that from happening. There are certain cases, such as, certain scarring alopecias that are a little bit more challenging. And certain forms of alopecia, the alopecia areata, sometimes telogen effluvium, which happens after a stressful event, that are a little bit more challenging to kind of get ahead of. But there are a lot of different options nowadays. So for instance, if someone has alopecia areata, there's things that they can do, such as steroid shots as well. If it's more of a scarring form of alopecia, same thing. There's been so many different therapeutics that are beyond medication that you can do topically. Like I mentioned, PRP, red light, all of these things can actually support the health of the hair follicles, because at the end of the day, it's all about keeping the hair follicles alive and healthy and active. So with doing so, you can do, like we talked about, the topical massage. We talked about the oils. We talked about following, more anti-inflammatory internally as well as topically too. Castor oil is another great topical anti-inflammatory oil. Those with more of the genetic predisposition, if they know that they have it, early prevention is the best.
And we know that the hair restoration market is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's continuing to grow. So this is just something that people continue to struggle with and are really looking for solutions for. Can we talk a little bit about functional labs and what you recommend your patients look at?
Absolutely. This is my favorite topic. Someone walks in, male or female, and they're having concerns around hair loss. So first, the most important thing is the intake, getting the history. When did it happen? How long has it been going on for? And we can then decide, is it more hormonal related? Is it more of a gradual change through physical examination and visual cues? I can tell, is it more androgenic, meaning am I seeing these kind of patterns occurring? Is it just kind of sporadic? Is this person just having all over thinning or shedding? For most of my patients with hair loss, I go ahead and do a functional lab test called the Dutch test, which looks at your hormones and it looks at cortisol levels. So it tells us about androgens, it'll tell us about estrogen, progesterone, because we can have, elevated androgens, we can have low estrogen. We want to know exactly which hormones are contributing. And then with the cortisol, we look at 4 point of cortisol. And so we look at the cortisol rhythm. So from first thing in the morning to the afternoon to the evening and nighttime. And the reason that we look at cortisol 4 times throughout the day is 1 time is not adequate amount to look at just a single point of cortisol to tell us about the overall cortisol throughout the day. When you look at this cortisol rhythm at 4 different points, we get a much better accuracy of understanding an individual's cortisol levels. And then let's say everything comes back normal. We'll go ahead and do further functional lab testing. Like I mentioned, a full thyroid panel, antibodies. We look at an iron panel with ferritin. I look at vitamin D, B12, folate, magnesium, zinc. These all play a role too. Let's say that comes back normal too. And then my secret weapon at the very end is I do a hair mineral analysis. And so what we can actually do is we can collect strands of our hair and send them in to see if there are any heavy metals and toxins in our environment that are affecting our hair health too. Because it is wild how certain heavy metals and certain toxins can actually impair the absorption of certain nutrients. So for instance, I always ask people, are you consuming aluminum deodorant, or are you baking your meats on an aluminum pan because we can have high amounts of aluminum? Or are you eating sushi once a week because that can contribute to higher amounts of mercury? Through our hair, it'll tell us not exactly where these minerals are coming from, but which minerals are elevated in terms of non-essential minerals. And then we can focus on getting them out of the body too.
And if this is something that somebody is struggling with, or you determine that there are heavy metals in their body, how do you recommend that they go about detoxing?
There's different ways. There's some schools of thought to kind of go more down a chelation protocol. I generally take more of a gentler approach. So I love to have people take a binder. So binders can be anything from charcoal to zeolite, clay, to fulvic and humic acid. And I love to get them sweating. So we always start with making sure the organs of detoxification are open. Are they sweating? Are they eliminating every day? And we get that going. And so my favorite way is through infrared sauna at least 3 times a week, with taking a binder right before then, eating more fibrous foods too to help to encourage detoxification, and then supporting the liver. So through milk thistle, glutathione, the master antioxidant, we just want to make sure that the liver is correctly processing these toxins and metals.
I love that you talked about IR sauna. That's something I did on another episode. I actually sat in mine this morning because I was feeling a little bogged down and just needed to really release those toxins. But can you tell us what somebody should look for in a supplement? Like, how do they decide if it's a high quality supplement?
So most importantly, you want to know, do they follow CGMP standards? Are they third-party testing? And you want to make sure, like we kind of just talked about, there's no heavy metals in there too. You also just want to make sure that their quality of ingredients are adequate at the therapeutic dosages as well. A lot of times I see supplements on the market where it'll throw in, like 20 milligrams of vitamin C when the therapeutic dose is anywhere from 100 to 1,000 in a person, or they'll throw in just a little bit of X amount of nutrient. And so when I look for supplementation, I try to find the therapeutic dosages. I try to find to make sure the supplement, like we talked about, is testing. I also sometimes can ask them where they get their ingredients from too. And so a lot of this information should be publicly available on the website. And if it's not, you can just go ahead and reach out to them to get their standards of practice.
That's something I like to call fairy dusting, where people like to use ingredients in their products simply just for marketing purposes, but it doesn't really have any kind of a benefit to the individual consuming them. And I think that's one of the things when we were formulating G-Vome's hair and nail support supplement that we really wanted to focus on, and just make sure that we were using those therapeutic doses per ingredient and making sure that the consumer is going to get fewer ingredients so that we can actually use that therapeutic dose. So it's just as effective as something more effective than something that is fairy dusting.
Can I talk about how much I loved your G-Vome Pro Collagen for a second? And
yes.
I take it. So I have a scoop of it in coconut water, no fail, every single morning. And I kid you not, it has helped my hair grow so fast. So this G-Vome Pro Collagen, it tastes great, and I love the benefits of it.
It helps me drink more water. So I feel like I might be a little addicted. I actually drink 2 scoops a day. I drink 1 in the morning. It helps me get down. I put it in 40 ounces of water instead of what we say on the label. And then in the afternoon, it's a nice little pick me up. And sometimes if I'm looking for a little mocktail, I love to throw it in sparkling water. So it's my functional beverage for the day.
I love that. And I love that, people are trending towards the functional mocktails too. It's a great way to unwind at the end of the day too. Add a little magnesium in there. And that sounds like a great hair health recipe for bed.
Yes. And adaptogens too. I know a lot of these beverages that people are coming out with, they are using adaptogens like ashwagandha, rhodiola to really help with stress management. Have you personally tried them yourself?
Absolutely. So there's been periods of time where I've had high stress, and then there's something called adrenal burnout and fatigue when your cortisol levels go down. There's different herbs for different, I'd say, cortisol levels. So for those who are having high cortisol, high stress, I love holy basil, otherwise known as tulsi, and ashwagandha is also really wonderful for lowering the cortisol. For those who are more just kind of burned out, and this was me after med school and residency, I felt like I hit a wall. I had some serious brain fog and fatigue. That's when you need to replenish your adrenal glands to have, an adequate amount of cortisol to kind of function throughout the day. And the herbs that I love are rhodiola, eulithro, ginseng. They just kind of help to revive the body. So I, no fail, every single day take some sort of adaptogen to help with stress. And I think it helps to keep me, focused, mentally clear, calm. And I'd say that's just something that is part of my routine every day. And I recommend it to a lot of individuals too.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Maybe we can create a little handout that our listeners can download so that they can try those as well.
Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Ruby, before we close, I would love to talk to you about any common myths or misconceptions that we can debunk today about hair loss.
Let's do it.
All right. Awesome. I've heard that wearing a hat often can actually contribute to baldness. Is that something that is true?
So that is something I will say I haven't checked the research on, but from what I do know about the health of hair follicles, especially really tight caps too, they can pull and tug on the hair strand, which can over time weaken the hair follicle too. So a lot of, men who tend to wear caps all the time, they wear it. It's kind of like tucking and pressing on the hair on the sides. And so I'd say if you are wearing a cap, try to keep it a little bit looser too. And you do want your hair to breathe. And sometimes if you're wearing a sweaty cap all day, every day, it's going to, trap bacteria in there. So I recommend to try to not do it often. And if you are doing it, to keep a loose hat and make sure that you're cleaning your hat often too.
What about the quick fixes that are out there that you see popping up all over the internet? I don't believe in a quick fix. I believe that you have to be really good and consistent about anything you do. And I know with the hair cycle and the way the hair grows that you're not going to see changes in anything you do within 14 days. It's just not going to work. So can you talk a little bit about those quick fixes that are out there and what your thoughts are on them?
So the first quick fix that comes to mind is something that is a household name nowadays, which is Rogaine. And so what Rogaine does is it increases the anagen phase. So it increases the hair, to be in the growing phase. So the concern with this is when you first start using it topically or taking it internally, a lot of times it can increase the shed initially. So people tend to kind of freak out at first when they start taking it. They're like, oh my gosh, my hair is falling out so much more now. But my biggest concern with it actually comes from the fact that it's kind of like a lifelong sentence. Once you start it, you pretty much have to continue with it. And with that, sometimes women get pregnant or people don't want to take it anymore. And when they discontinue it, they notice their hair just kind of reverting back. So this goes back to just focusing on the root cause again. I've seen so many other products on the market that just, like you mentioned, kind of fairy dust all these different ingredients in there too. And that's concerning to me as well because you're not actually getting a high amount of dosage. I like to give the example. Let's say there's someone with high blood pressure. Their doctor had recommended them, let's say their medication be 20 milligrams a day of a certain medication, and the patient's coming around and taking 5 milligrams a day. That's not going to control their blood pressure. And so you need to get to that therapeutic dosage to help with managing blood pressure. You need to get that therapeutic dosage to help with the hair loss too. So a lot of times people tend to, cut corners as well when it comes to it. And so I really try to encourage people, like, it has been studied for this reason at this dosage. So let's continue on with that. Do you have any other kind of ways people are kind of shortcutting hair loss? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that too, or different things that they're trying.
No, not really shortcutting. I know we talked about red light, things that I believe in, but I know just people are very quick to disregard a supplement after after, 30 days because they're like, well, I tried it for a whole month and I didn't see any changes, or even getting on hormone replacement therapy where they're like, well, I tried it for a whole month and I just didn't see any changes. And I think that these days people are so big into the instant gratification. We've got Amazon that can deliver same day. And so I feel like people are just wanting these quick fixes. And really what I want people to understand is that a quick fix for hair loss is not a thing. It takes consistency, and it really takes this holistic approach to really looking at the underlying causes and diving into what a very well-rounded, balanced lifestyle looks like.
Absolutely. And so with our hair, I tell every patient of mine it's going to take at minimum 3 to 6 months because of our hair growth cycle. You will not start to see changes before 3 months. And between 3 to 6 months is when you'll start to notice a reduction in the shedding. You'll maybe notice your hair growing a little bit longer and the start of the baby hairs growing out. But it's truly at that 6 months to 1 year that changes visibly begin to occur. So telling people, it is a journey and to please stick with it and, to let them know that they will see results if they continue on.
All right. Well, Dr. Ruby, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I always value your opinion, and you're so knowledgeable, and I'm sure that our viewers will find it valuable as well. Can you tell people where they can find you?
You can find me in practice at Zen Dermatology, aka Zen Regen. So if you're interested in getting to the root of your hair loss, I'd love to support you. So zendermatology.com. Otherwise, you can find me on social media, which I'll post some hair loss tips and tricks here and there at Heal with Dr. Dang.
Guys, as you can see, a holistic approach to hair health is so important because hair loss is often multifaceted, and well-rounded approach involving diet, lifestyle, and professional support can make a huge difference. So if you're experiencing hair loss, there are solutions. It's not something you just have to live with. And I encourage you to consider functional testing and a holistic strategy before jumping into conventional treatments. Thank you for tuning in to the Unfiltered Fix with Dr. Dang and me. I hope today's conversation shed some light on the causes and solutions for hair loss and gave you practical insights to take control of your hair health. If you're ready to dive deeper, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel to watch today's episode. Again, if you're looking to book an appointment with Dr. Dang, we've got the booking link in the show notes, along with the link to G-Vome's hair and nail support supplement and our Pro Collagen for those wanting to give their hair health a boost from the inside out. Stay tuned for next week, where we'll jump into cosmetic treatments that you may want to consider for hair restoration. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next week.